Hello everyone, I am Tacet, and today I just wanted to briefly go over the 3 new status effects that ended up coming into version 4.2 of Gems of War. This is one of the smaller patches that they ended up doing this year, and most of the things aren't really too relevant. We went over in Monday in the full changelogs in the description if you want to see it, but basically it was just a bunch of small guild changes and small tweaks here and there. But one of the more noteworthy things is that we did get 3 new status effects. One that is positive and 2 that is negative. There aren't really too many things that can place them at the moment though, but they are Cursed, Blessed, and Bleed. As far as getting Blessed, the only really viable way to go get that on your team would be to go and have a Divinia fully traded and just getting a bunch of extra turns. As far as getting Cursed and Bleed onto the enemy, there's 2 viable ways of doing this. You can either use the rare Dragonet, which is super easy to obtain. Otherwise, you could use a fully traded Magnus, which does very similar to that of a Divinia, in that it keeps getting a random status effect on the enemies every single time it gets an extra turn. There will obviously be things in the future that will have these kind of abilities at 100% rate, but at the current moment in time, none of those exist. The next Delve is going to be bringing in a lot of Bleed, and the other functions, the other 2 status effects will be brought in as well over time, as well as all 3 of them just having more options. But anyways, as far as what they do, let's go over the positive one first. It is Blessed. It is essentially just a impervious with a additional effect of having immune to mana drain. So even if something has impervious like this, it is still technically beneficial to have a Blessed on it, simply because that will also give it a mana drain immunity. One other thing to note about Blessed, which is this Rays of Light right over here, is that it can also get rid of any status effects that are currently on them that are negative. So if they are currently Hunter's Marked or Entangled or anything like that, and then they get Blessed, all those things will be cleansed on them, and they basically have Impervious for the duration of their ability. Do be mindful, though, that if this troop that is Blessed ends up taking a Skull or ends up casting its ability, it will end up losing the Blessed that it has on it. So, next up, we have Cursed. This is basically kind of like a disease, except better, kind of. It's essentially every single status effect in the game, except for Poison, has a 10% chance per turn that it will be cleansed off naturally. So it's 10%, and 20%, and 30%, and so on and so forth as time goes on. So even if you don't have a cleanse, status effects, of course, just naturally cleanse off over time. But basically what Cursed does, which is this little purple thing right here, is it essentially halves that. So it then goes down to 5%, then 10%, then 15%, then 20%, and so on and so forth until it eventually cleanses, making it a lot harder to get rid of any status effects that a troop has on it. They can still cleanse it like normal, but it's going to be a lot harder assuming they don't have cleanse, and many teams these days do not really run cleanse, except for maybe divine teams, things that run mercy, and a few other things. But for the most part, it's not extremely common to always have a cleanser in your team. So that will allow it to basically just extend any kind of team that has a lot of status effect spam, like Magnus or anything else that might want to perpetually have status effects like Bleed onto the enemy team and keep them on it. One additional benefit of Cursed is that it does override Bless, so if something has Bless, you can just override it with a Curse. And other than that, you can also go and get rid of traits. You may notice here, or I should say get rid of immunities. You may notice here that both of these are stunned, which shouldn't be normal because this has Fortitude, which is immune to stun, and this has Impervious, which is of course also immune to stun, as well as other status effects. But both of these have these status effects because once a troop is cursed, they essentially lose all of their immunities that they have. So you can easily just go and put a stun on them or any other status effects and just keep getting it going, and normally things that would never be possible to put on these kind of troops, you would be able to with Curse, making it a pretty hard counter to things like Impervious. Do keep in mind things that have that indestructible thing, like Zugoth, like the towers, they do still have immunity to Curse. It only works against things that specifically have Impervious. And lastly, we have Bleed, which is by far, I would say, the best of all 3 of these. It is insanely good damage. I wish this is just what Poison was in the first place, pretty much. It's basically just a really, really good poison. It is temporary, like every other status effect other than Poison, but essentially it has 4 levels, level 1, 2, 3, and 4. Level 1 does 1 damage, true damage. All these do true damage. Level 1 does 1 damage per turn, level 2 does 3 damage per turn, level 3 does 6 damage per turn, and level 4, which is when it maxes at, ends up doing 10 true damage per turn. That is obviously a lot of damage to be able to do to the enemy perpetually. So if I just go take a move real quick to deliberately end our turn, actually let's take some status effects first. If it'll let me, just grab that, and let's just take this blue. So as you'll see here, this troop should take 6 or 7 damage. Actually, wait, we still have extra turns. Stop giving me so many extra turns! Okay, so right here, oh no, we still have an extra turn. How many more extra turns does it want to give me? I probably even have a drop there. I won't take it though. But we'll take this blue. So you'll see here, this will take about 6 or 7 damage. The reason it'll vary is because the poison has a 50% chance to do 1 damage. Yeah, it'll do either 6 or 7, and this should take 4. Because that will do 1 damage, and the burn will do 3. So that should bring it to 54, and that should bring it down to either 109 or 108, depending on if the poison hits. And as you can see, the poison didn't hit, and it brought that other thing down too. So yeah, that's bleed, and if you had a way to constantly, perpetually keep bleeding, you could theoretically forever do 10 true damage to the entire enemy team per turn, and even if they have impervious, you could just go curse them, and then boom, 10 to all enemies per turn, and that's a lot of true damage. It might actually be what makes true damage viable again. It hasn't been viable for a very, very long time. Divines will still hard counter it, always, just because they have so much cleanse and counter to that kind of stuff, as well as HP gain in general, which makes Divines even better! Indirect buff back to Divines. But other than that, yeah, there's a lot of teams that would be really destroyed by taking that much damage constantly, unless they have infinite loop or other methods to get around it. But even then, you could freeze it with random status effects. But yeah, it'll be interesting once we start getting more options of those. Also, just to show it real quick, as you can see, we have Blessed here, but if we cast this ability, we'll immediately lose this Bless. Actually, we can see it off of Moneylender right now without even losing our turn. As you can see right there, he just lost his Bless. We'll lose this Bless too as soon as we cast that. If they take a Skull or if they use their ability, they will lose it. And yeah, that's pretty much everything I wanted to go over. If you still have any other questions or anything else, feel free to leave it in the comment section below, and hopefully we'll see some interesting troops soon that will end up utilizing these 3 new abilities. Goodbye, everyone, and best of luck with version 4.2.